Well, first of all, I take exception to the idea that breaking my ankle playing basketball makes me old. I think what proves the fact that I'm getting older even more is the fact that I didn't kick over the chair and stand up here in pain to prove that I wasn't old. That probably proves more than anything else. I also want to clarify that I did break my ankle playing basketball, but I was on offense. Nobody crossed me over. No one broke my ankles. I did it myself. I don't know if that's better or worse, but I feel like that needs to be clarified as well. Also, I will say, Nathan, at the very least, you could have taken the cushion off the chair. As much as it is appreciated comfort, I don't know, my pride, just got to tough out something, I don't know. I didn't wear a tie. Hope you all forgive me. There's only so much discomfort I could take this morning, so. I want to talk about, though, and preach on this morning something that I've been thinking about a lot lately. It's been on my mind the last couple weeks, and that's the idea of pain. Been in a little bit of pain, discomfort. My foot is all sorts of colors. It's one of the things, you break a bone and you're like, oh, well, got to heal the bone. Didn't think about the fact that I also sprained my ankle pretty badly, bad enough to break the bone. And so all the colors I keep seeing on my toes and heel and everywhere else are a little bit disconcerting. But I think I'm getting better. Hopefully, maybe even next week, I'll be able to walk up here in my boot without crutches, but we'll have to see. Pain, though, it's really just part of the human experience, isn't it? We try to compare our pain. We argue sometimes about what hurts worse, who had it worse, who has the higher pain tolerance. I'm not really sure why we do that. As a kid, I remember competing with some other kids on who could keep our hand in an ice bucket, a bucket of ice water the longest. I won, but I'm not sure if that means that I actually won. It's one of those things, probably the kid who won was the kid who didn't participate because he realized how dumb of an activity that was. But we do this kind of weird thing with our pain. We try to compare things. Somebody who breaks their ankle thinks it hurts really badly, but then somebody else who tore a bunch of ligaments, broke their ankle 4 places, had a bunch of rods and screws put in, they may look at the guy who broke his ankle and say, that's nothing, right? It's all relative. We compare about those things. We think about it differently. And the comparison's a little bit silly, I think we recognize, because all it really is demonstrating, because the reality is pain is there either way. Pain exists, whether it's a lot of pain for you or compared to somebody else, is irrelevant to the fact that it's painful. Broken bone's painful. Reconstructive ankle surgery is painful. But we kind of do this comparison thing. A kid who's in pain because of a sore in their mouth, right? You look at him and you say, well, that's not that big of a deal. That's nothing. Wait till you get a little bit older and experience real pain, right? But that's not comforting to the child that has never had a sore in their mouth before and is worried about what it means and it hurts, right? The fact is that is painful and it's a difficult thing, whether it is a big, difficult thing compared to other things or not. And so regardless of how severe or inconsequential the pain may be, it's just part of the human experience from the time you're a newborn baby all the way up. Babies cry as soon as they're born. The painfulness of coming into the world and leaving the safety and security that they had for the last 9 months as they grew. Life is hard and life is painful. And the Bible has some really interesting things to say about pain. And in particular, there's one analogy that God uses throughout the Bible. In fact, it's more than a dozen times in the Bible that this image is used, and it's a pretty striking one. And it's that of a woman in labor. It's an interesting one, the way that the Bible uses it. Now, I need to clarify, I've never experienced labor pains, as you all can imagine, but I have witnessed it up close 3 times. And it is, I feel justified in those experiences of watching it to say that labor pains are in fact painful, that it doesn't look very pleasant. And in fact, one of the amazing things to me is that a woman can go through labor and then decide to do it again. I think that says something. But God comes back to this image several times, this idea of a woman in labor pains. And I want to start with one example here in Matthew chapter 24. Matthew 24 is a chapter I tend to try and stay away from quite a bit. It's a difficult judgment chapter. There's a lot of difficult things going on. But in Matthew chapter 4, starting in verse 3, Jesus is talking to his disciples, and it says, "As he sat on the Mount of Olives, the disciples came to him privately, saying, 'Tell us, when will these things be, and what will be the sign of your coming and of the end of the age?' And Jesus answered them, 'See that no one leads you astray. For many will come in my name, saying, I am the Christ, and they will lead many astray. And you will hear of wars and rumors of wars. See that you're not alarmed, for this must take place. But the end is not yet. For the nation will rise against nation, kingdom against kingdom. There will be famines and earthquakes in various places. All these are but the beginning of the birth pains. Then they will deliver you up to tribulation and put you to death, and you will be hated by all the nations for my name's sake. And then many will fall away and betray one another and hate one another. And many false prophets will arise and lead many astray. And because lawlessness will be increased, the love of many will grow cold. But the one who endures to the end will be saved. And this gospel of the kingdom will be proclaimed throughout the whole world as a testimony to all nations. And then the end will come." I mean, this is a difficult chapter, right? Like, is he talking about the destruction of Jerusalem? He's talking about the end of the world? I mean, probably a little bit of both, right? And, people divide up the chapter into those different segments. I don't want to get into all that. The idea, though, is that the end that is coming is painful, right? There are wars, there are desolations, there's tribulations, there's death. And he says they're labor pains, like a woman in labor pains. They're the precursor. They're a difficult prelude to the judgment that is coming. And through the whole process, though, he comes back at the end of that to say, the gospel is preached to all nations. Then the end will come. What is the end? Well, I mean, that's kind of the question people have about the chapter. Is Jesus talking about Jerusalem, the end of the world, all those things? Bit of both, probably, depending on how you divide up the chapter and those sort of things. But what's striking this morning isn't the difficulty of Matthew 24. It's why that analogy? Why use labor pains of a woman here in Matthew chapter 24? That's interesting to me. Let's go to Revelation 12. Let's go to Revelation 12. Revelation 12 and verse 1. "And a great sign appeared in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun, with the moon under her feet, and on her head a crown of 12 stars. She was pregnant and was crying out in birth pains and the agony of giving birth. And another sign appeared in heaven. Behold, a great red dragon with 7 heads and 10 horns, and on his heads 7 diadems. His tail swept down 1/3 of the stars of heaven and cast them to the earth. And the dragon stood before the woman who was about to give birth, so that when she bore her child, he might devour it. She gave birth to a male child, one who is to rule all the nations with a rod of iron. But her child was caught up to God and to his throne. And the woman fled into the wilderness, where she has a place prepared by God, in which she is to be nourished for 1,260 days. It was about this point in the sermon when I decided that maybe I shouldn't preach this sermon, because I've already got Matthew 24, now I'm going to Revelation 12, and surely I'm going to get myself into trouble picking on these two passages in the same lesson. But we're going to venture forward anyway. It's too late to turn back now. When we look at passages in Revelation and we look at these images, our tendency is to try to allegorize them. Try and make each bit represent something specifically. And so when you read commentaries on Revelation, in the introduction they always have like a thing about apocalyptic literature and how it isn't an allegory and it's like an overall image and all these things. And then you get to a place like chapter 12 and they say, well, the woman is such and such and the dragon is such and such and the 12 stars are this and the 1,260 days is this. And then they make it all an allegory. And it's like, well, I thought you just said it wasn't an allegory. It's always a little bit of a humorous thing to me. And so this morning, I'm not interested in what each one of those things specifically represent. I don't think that matters. What I do think matters is that here's an image of evil attacking a woman who's about to give birth. And this child is born and is saved and protected and taken to heaven, right? Like, that's the story. Evil comes, evil doesn't win. And the book of Revelation as a whole is a book that deals with this idea of pain, that deals with the idea of trouble coming, that deals with the idea of persecution. And through it all, the message is Jesus wins. And so here the Son of Man is raised up to the throne of heaven, and the dragon isn't able to feed him. Regardless of what those details may or may not specifically mean, the overall image is clear, right? There's these birth pains, there's these labor pains, and then the Son of Man is born, and he is able to be lifted up into heaven. We want to call the dragon Satan. It's fine. Whether or not he's Satan specifically or just a representation of evil doesn't really matter. I want to highlight, though, the woman who's crying out in birth pains. Why that image? Why that language? One more example here in John 16, because I think this will finalize the image for us a little bit, make it all abundantly clear. In John 16, verse 20, Jesus says, "Truly, truly, I say to you, you will weep and lament, but the world will rejoice. You will be sorrowful, but your sorrow will turn into joy. When a woman is giving birth, she has sorrow because her hour has come. But when she has delivered the baby, she no longer remembers the anguish, for joy that a human being has been born into the world. So also you have sorrow now, but I will see you again, and your hearts will rejoice, and no one will take your joy from you." Jesus uses the exact same analogy here, and he's talking about his death, his upcoming death. And the analogy's completed here, right? I mean, it's been there the whole time. We know what the implication is, but here he makes it clear. What do the labor pains imply? They imply a new birth. They imply something new, something great, something positive. I mentioned in the introduction, kind of jokingly, women who can go through the suffering of labor pains and then decide to do it again, right? Well, why? It's because it's worth it, right? It's worth it. You have a new life here. Something amazing has been accomplished, something beautiful. That's why. The reason why the Bible uses this analogy is because, yeah, it's painful to give birth to a child. Yeah, it's difficult, it's hard. But in the end, you have a new life. You have something beautiful before you. And so it's an image that's used quite a bit in judgment passages. It's talking here about judgment on himself, taking judgment for the world, his death, right, in John 16. Or Revelation 12, the dragon coming, right, like the judgment on the woman and then the son being born. Matthew 24, judgment on Jerusalem and the earth. And plenty of other ones. 1 Thessalonians 5, all sorts of places it talks about labor pains. And the reason why it's used in judgment language is because, yeah, something hard is happening. But what occurs after the judgment? What occurs through the judgment? Salvation, a new life, a restoration, something great. And let's go back to Genesis 3, because this is obviously where you might have expected me to start. But I wanted to go through those other passages because now when we go back to Genesis 3, I want us to notice something. So Genesis 3, man and woman sinned in the garden. God comes, he confronts them, and then he gives these curses, right? Curse on the serpent, curse on the woman, curse on man. Verse 14 of Genesis 3, the Lord said to the serpent, "Because you have done this, cursed are you above all livestock and above all beasts of the field. On your belly you shall go, and dust you shall eat all the days of your life. I will put enmity between you and the woman, and between your offspring and her offspring. He shall bruise your head, and you shall bruise his heel." Right? The seed promise. Inherent in the curse on the serpent is the seed promise. That's fundamental to the gospel story. Then to the woman he said in verse 16, "I will surely multiply your pain in childbearing. In pain you shall bring forth children. Your desire shall be contrary to your husband, but he shall rule over you." Do you recognize the connection between those two things? The serpent is cursed, but part of that curse is the seed promise. And the woman is cursed, and the curse is in pain, is multiplied in childbearing. But what is the repercussion of childbearing? What is inherent in the curse on the serpent? The promise of salvation for the world. Inherent in the curse on the woman is the promise. It's built in right there from the beginning. That through this difficult, cursed process, salvation comes. And so we look at pain and childbearing as a curse, right? Because it is. But we also have to recognize that it's part of the promise. It's part of that process, and it becomes this clarifying idea throughout the entirety of the Bible, used repetitively through the prophets, used several times in the New Testament. It becomes this image and this idea to say, it's hard, but it's worth it. I mean, the human experience is pain, right? Break a bone, right? It's hard, it's painful, but it's worth it. It becomes an informative attitude for us to have as Christians. We can't avoid it, we can't hide from it, we can't escape it. Maybe I shouldn't say this. I hope she doesn't get mad at me. When one of our kids was being born, I can't remember which one, Megan said, "I don't want to do this." My heart broke a little bit at that moment. Nothing I can do, right? And she didn't mean I don't have a child. She meant I don't want to do this. I mean, that's the human experience, isn't it? How often are we confronted with something we say, I don't want to do this. I don't want to deal with this. I mean, a much smaller scale, but even when I broke my ankle, right? Playing basketball, feel a pop, go down hard, hurts like crazy. And you're just thinking, there's no way out. Like, there's no way to make this stop hurting. Like, at that moment, you know that you've got a difficult few weeks. And that's just a, broken bone. I can take some Tylenol a little bit. Doctors were offering me all sorts of opioids. I was like, it doesn't hurt that bad. I don't need to get addicted to painkillers over it. But, it was like in that moment, though, and the unknown, you don't know how it feels, you just think, man, I just want out. I just want to escape. Like, just make it stop. Like, how do I get away from this? I've had back pain before, herniated a disc, and you're just sitting there, and you got this nerve pain running down your leg, and you're like, how does this stop? Taking Tylenol, taking ibuprofen, taking whatever. Get the little TINS machine that's on your leg that's supposed to pull the pain away. I had that thing cranked up to like 150%, and it just felt like needles. Didn't stop the pain, right? That didn't work. Get a heating pad, that doesn't work. And you're just sitting there thinking, how can it stop? And a lot of you have felt a lot worse pain than that, have experienced a lot harder things than a couple broken bones or something. And you just sit there and you think, how can it stop? Or maybe, even more poignantly, we live and we deal with other kinds of pain, emotional pain, loss of loved ones. We deal with betrayal. We deal with people hurting us. And we sit there and we think, how are we going to deal with this? But that image is there lurking, right? Like a woman in labor pains. I mean, we look at the Bible and we look at these other passages and these other ideas, like Hebrews 12:6, for the Lord disciplines the one he loves and chastises every son whom he receives. The whole idea is, like, it's for our good. It leads us where we need to go. Maybe even more informatively is James 1:2. Count it all joy, my brothers, when you meet trials of various kinds, for you know that the testing of your faith produces steadfastness, and let steadfastness have its full effect, that you may be perfect and complete, lacking in nothing. Right? Like, it's the difficult things that help prove that you believe what you believe. It's the difficult things that push you towards God. You want to know, how do I have a faith? How do I know that I believe? Well, it's how you respond to difficulty, how you respond to pain. Whether in a small way or a big way, that's how you know. And that pain there is the refinement that proves to us that we believe. That even at this cost, even at this expense, I'm not going to back down from what I believe. That's a big deal. For those of you who are hoping that injuring myself playing basketball would stop the basketball analogies, you're wrong. Cheesy basketball analogy. I don't really like Michael Jordan very much. Not a very big secret. I think he's a little bit overrated. I think that wasn't a very good teammate, not a very good person. Don't really like him. But I'm in the minority there. I will say about Michael Jordan, though, that he provides an excellent analogy for us. Those of you who know basketball know that through the 80s, he came in the league in like 84. You had the Celtics that were dominant. As they got older, kind of faded. The Detroit Pistons were the next big team, right? And they won a couple titles. And they beat the Bulls and beat Jordan a couple times. And they talked about the Jordan rules, right? And the bad boy Pistons. And what they basically said was every time Jordan comes in the lane, we're going to hit him. And sometimes it was dirty. Sometimes it was a cheap shot. Sometimes it was just physical. But they hit him, right? So Jordan goes to the gym, starts lifting, gets stronger. Michael Jordan doesn't become Michael Jordan if he doesn't have to beat the Pistons, right? The pain of losing, them beating him every time he drives the basket. Like, those are the things that made him the tough competitor that won 6 titles, right? Like, it's those difficulties that made him into who he was. It's the way we are as humans too, right? It's the hard things, it's the painful things that have a huge impact on who we become. Those of you who don't like basketball, you think about music or something, right? Like, you go to learn to play the guitar. And you sit there and you're like, I'm going to learn a chord. And you sit there and you like work really hard to get your fingers there. And you're like, okay, I'm going to play a D. You're like, man, my fingers hurt. But you push through 30 minutes. Get your 30 minutes in that first day. Your fingers are sore. Next day you're like, all right, let's do it again. And you're like, I don't know. My fingers hurt pretty bad. Maybe I'll wait till they feel better. And then you either never play again or you push through, right? And you just play and your fingers hurt and they hurt and they hurt. And then one day they don't hurt. You know, your hands sore from trying to make these weird shapes on the guitar neck. One day, though, your hand's stronger. It's more agile. Your fingers have calluses. Now you can play the guitar. It's like through the painful process of learning a skill and getting those calluses that you develop something that can be pretty cool or powerful or great, whatever you want to think about it. That's life, right? That is life. It is the difficulty leading to something better. Like a woman in labor pains. So is a man who learns to play the guitar, right? I don't know. Probably not. A little bit too dramatic for guitar playing, I guess. But we get the analogy. Trials lead to our perfection. They refine us. They build us up. But I want to be clear, too, that isn't to minimize pain or to act like it's inconsequential. Quite the contrary. It's hard. It's like a difficult thing. Pain's emotional. It's challenging. It tests us. It's inherent in the sin-filled world. But this morning, what I'm trying to get across, what I'm trying to help with, is to clarify and to help us see that pain isn't always evil. Pain is there to drive us back to God. It's an opportunity for growth. It's a rebuke that reminds us of what God can give us, which is freedom from pain. I mean, that's the very idea in the gospel, in the law of Moses, right? You sin, I will punish you. But if you repent, I will bless you, right? The pain is there to remind us of what we have when we leave God, which is nothing. It's to drive us back to Him, because He can free us from those things. Life isn't easy. Christianity certainly isn't easy, but that doesn't mean we give up or quit. And that leads us to the last passage on labor pains this morning. And I was going to start with this one, and I was like, no, I can't start with this one. I got to finish with this one. Isaiah 66. The book of Isaiah is a little bit difficult, just because it's a little bit convoluted organizationally. He kind of jumps around timelines and what he's talking about. But to summarize it, which I guess you could say most of the prophets, it's about judgment and it's about hope. Not always in that order, but they're both there consistently through the book. And in particular, the last, 20 chapters or so of the book highlight the idea of hope a little bit more. And that's where we get our text this morning in Isaiah 66. In this section where he's kind of honing in a little bit on hope. He says in Isaiah 66 and verse 7, before she was in labor, she gave birth. Before her pain came upon her, she delivered a son. Who has heard of such a thing? Who has seen such things? Shall a land be born in one day? Shall a nation be brought forth in one moment? For as soon as Zion was in labor, she brought forth her children. Shall I bring to the point of birth and not cause to bring forth, says the Lord? Shall I, who cause to bring forth, shut the womb, says your God? Rejoice with Jerusalem and be glad for her, all you who love her. Rejoice with her in joy, all you who mourn over her, that you may nurse and be satisfied from her consoling breast, that you may drink deeply with delight from her glorious abundance. For thus says the Lord, behold, I will extend peace to her like a river, and the glory of the nations like an overflowing stream. And you shall nurse, you shall be carried upon her hip and bounced upon her knees. As one whom his mother comforts, so I will comfort you. You shall be comforted in Jerusalem. You shall see, and your heart shall rejoice. Your bones shall flourish like the grass. And the hand of the Lord shall be known to his servants, and he shall show his indignation against his enemies. It's an amazing image, right? It's different than the other ones. The other ones talk about birth pains, right? Labor pains. And here he says, no, there's no labor pains. Just the birth. Just the new birth. Just the new great thing. So maybe, you're tempted to leave it out a little bit because it's like, well, that's the exact opposite of what I've been preaching. That salvation comes only through great difficulty. And now he says it just comes, right? Just this gift. Well, the Bible uses analogies consistently and uses similar language consistently through the Bible, but that doesn't mean it always uses it the same way. You look at mountains and valleys in the Bible, and typically valleys are places of judgment and mountains are places of glory, but there are examples where it's flipped on its head to specific points to prove certain things. And here he does that. Right? Isaiah flips it. God flips it here. Not to contrast those other ones and say that they're wrong, but to simply highlight the beauty of God's promise. To talk about how great the thing is that God gives us. It's different and it should stand out to us because it is different. And what is it talking about? It's talking about being with God. It's talking about the heavenly city, Jerusalem. It's talking about the moment in which we are with him. There's no labor pain in Isaiah 66. Before she was in labor, she gave birth. Judgment is like labor pains. 1 Thessalonians 5 says it, Jeremiah 22 says it, Matthew 24 says it. Right? It's there through the Bible. But Isaiah 66 promises a future with no pain, where there's life and life abundantly, without the difficulty that's necessary for it to exist here. That's a beautiful and kind of powerful sentiment, isn't it? There will be peace like a river. The children will be bounced on the knee and comforted. And then maybe most poignantly to me this morning is, your bones will grow and flourish like grass. That sounds pretty good. There's a world, and there's a place, and there's a promise, and there's a hope in which good things come without the labor pains, in which life is abundant without the difficult process to achieve it. One of the things that I just am amazed by with God and with the way that the Bible is written are the way that he could take images like a woman in labor pains, which is a little bit uncomfortable to talk about, if I'm honest. It's not like I'm excited to talk about that for a whole sermon, but it takes an image like that we understand, that's fundamental to the human experience, and he uses it and develops it to teach something that's fundamental to the way that the world operates and that's fundamental to the way that we're saved. It's almost like he did it on purpose. That from the beginning, he knew what he was doing. And he understood the images and the analogies and the way the world existed, so that inherent all around us, whether we look at, the way that crops grow and make parables out of that, or the way that life is created, all of it points us in his direction. And then he takes all of those analogies and all those things that are fundamental to our, things that we know that are true, unequivocally, right? You can't get away from the difficulty of giving birth. I've heard people say things like, women shouldn't get epidurals because they should feel the curse or something like that, which is really silly. But it doesn't really matter if you have a nerve blocker shot into your spine or not, right? Like, it's a painful, difficult process with a difficult recovery. Like, there's no escaping the pain that life has. Take all the Tylenol you want, right? That doesn't stop pain from existing. And that's the reality for the world that's here. And yet, in that, God says, there's an exception. You all see the world this way, but I envision a place that's this other way, that has all the beautiful things that you value, that has fruit and flowers that blossom every month, that has beautiful rivers flowing with life-giving water, that has all the beautiful gemstones and all the wonderful things you can imagine. And there's life. And there's life without the difficult, painful process of creating it. When I think about God and His promises and the things that He's done for us and things that He will do for us and the connectivity between here and now, I see it as like an extension of all the beautiful things we have with all the sin and the pain removed. And the Bible uses similar language, but I want to highlight that because when we think about where we're going and what our focus is on and what we're trying to achieve, it's a place with God's goodness and purity surrounding us without us getting in the way. The sinful things that cause pain, that create problems in the world, they come from us as humans. Some of it, curse of the land is inherent, but it all comes from us. Like, you see a couple that's struggling in their marriage, and it's like, well, the parties involved in the marriage create the problems, right? And the pain and the suffering you see in this specific instance or that one, it's the result of human sin. Whether your sin or somebody else's, it's the result of sin, and that pain exists because of it. And what God's trying to do, and what the New Testament teaches us, is that as we grow like God and we act more like Him, some of those sinful things drop away. Some of that painful stuff is avoided because we're doing things the way that God would have us to. And so the fidelity we practice in marriage, for instance, saves us from the pain of an adulterous relationship, right? Like, we do things the way God wants us to, and it preserves us from some of that pain. But the more we do those things, and the more we see the value of God's way, and the closer we get to it, the closer we get to what God offers us in heaven, in which our sin no longer blockades the blessings of God, in which there's no longer labor pains to give life, because God has freed us of those things. Hope that makes sense this morning. Hopefully it isn't some sort of like pain-induced ramblings that if I go back and listen to later, I'm going to be really disappointed in myself. But, you think about life, and you think about the hardships, the difficulties that we face. They're breeding something new and beautiful for us if we're steadfast and we're faithful and we press forward. And so that's the urging this morning. Are we headed towards that place that's described here in Isaiah 66? Wednesday night, Edwin Crozier did a great job talking about our assurance. And if you weren't here, go listen to that lesson. It was very good. But there's that question that lingers over us. Are we assured of our salvation? And I think we can be, and I think we should be. But the first step is baptism and committing yourself to God. And notice that baptism itself mimics a little bit of the language we talked about today. It's a death, it's a burial, it's a resurrection. It is a difficult process by which we are created anew. And it's hard to take that step. It's hard to humble yourself before people. It's hard to say that we recognize we are sinners worthy of death. But through that process, we can be redeemed and restored and be with God. And sometimes equally as difficult is asking for help and asking for prayers. And so This morning, if you need us to pray for you or encourage you, please let us know as we stand and sing this song.